And I just want to say that J.D. Vance, Teal, Tucker Carlson, these other guys didn't convert to the Roman Catholic Church. They converted to a power structure that attracts them because of the politics. They don't know shit about Catholicism.
It's Ken Harbaugh, and we've got a great show today. Dara Starr Tucker is back in the host chair interviewing one of our audience favorites, Frank Schaeffer. It's a wide-ranging but deeply thoughtful conversation about how MAGA extremism has twisted Christianity and manipulated churches in a way that threatens not only faith communities, but undermines democracy itself. It's a good one. Here's Dara and Frank.
Hi there. My name is Dara Starr Tucker, and welcome to the Kenneth Harbaugh Show. I am so glad to have been asked to guest host this episode. When Ken asked me what guests I would prefer, I threw out a couple of names, but the number one name that I said I wanted to talk to, again, was the guest that we have with us today, Mr. Frank Schaeffer. So I'm so glad that you have agreed to do this once again, Frank, because I feel like so much has happened since the last time we talked. And we talked a lot about kind of your history and my history and how those histories intersect just a little bit. But there is so much more ground to cover. And I've been watching some of the content that you've been putting out there recently. So I cannot wait to get into this discussion with you about some very specific topics and questions that I have for you. So thank you so much for being here today, Frank.
Well, listen, when my producer of my podcast, in conversation with Frank Schaeffer, Ernie Gregg said, that you and I could talk again, I jumped at the opportunity, just as I did a minute ago, before we started this show. And you were saying you were going to be in my area of the country in Boston with your husband, and maybe we could all get together, because I really enjoyed our conversation. And then I got into your music, and began listening to things, many of your recordings, which I'm still playing, by the way. And so it's odd because jokingly, I said a moment ago, I only agreed to do this if you sing 3 songs. And I know we're not set up and we don't have the right kind of mic, but in case people think you're a talk show person or you have podcasts and all that, I want to say Dara does many things, but one of them is she's one of the most beautiful jazz vocalists in the United States, period. No qualification at all. So check out Dara's music, whatever else you do. If that's all that happens because you watch this, you will have spent your time well.
Thank you, Frank. That's really kind of you.
No, it's not kind. It's just truthful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Frank. And I kind of, I wrestle a little bit between that juxtaposition between all of the, the various things that I do, which is a lot of online commentary mostly, and then music. That's what I am by trade. Yeah. And so all of this is within the last few years, having these conversations. And the best part of what I've done, transitioning I just had a performance last week, so it's not as though I've let go of the music. Yeah. But transitioning more into this role of commentary and conversation, the best part of that is getting to talk to people like you. I never would have probably come in contact with you just as a singer, it's just really exciting for me. If you didn't hear the last podcast episode that we did, the reason that I know who Frank Schaeffer is because I knew who his father was, Francis Schaeffer. He was a big part of my educational experience. I went to a small liberal arts college in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Oral Roberts University. Yeah. And there was a couple named the Sextons. I don't remember what their first names were, but they were obsessed with this series called How Should We Then Live from Francis Schaeffer, which is Frank's dad. Yeah. And Frank's dad was foundational for a lot of people in terms of, the study of just theology and political theory around, what role Christianity should play in our political life. Yeah. And so his father has been foundational for so many people. He was foundational for me. I loved the intellectualism of, what he presented, because I grew up Pentecostal holiness, and then we transitioned into the evangelical church, or a non-denominational thing, but had to have been introduced to that kind of intellectualism around Christianity, and even the politicizing of Christianity. That was all new for me. That was my experience at Oral Roberts University because of your dad. And so I've, made my own transition in what they call now deconstruction, which did not even exist when I was in college. But, I've now kind of camped out with those folks. And Frank has been on his own. He has been on a path for the last 40 years, would you say, Frank? kind of rectifying and trying to undo a lot of the harm and the damage that he feels that he did in working with his father. So if you have not had a chance to watch that first interview, I would probably suggest watching some of that to kind of understand what the foundation of the history is, because I don't want to repeat too much of that. But what I do want to focus on, Frank, is now the document and the manifesto that has been talked about so much now that really wasn't being talked about, I don't think, when we last spoke, and that's Project 25.
Yeah, 2025.
And so I've kind of heard you discuss this. I have to admit, I watched a talk that you did this morning a couple of times because it was so dense, as is a lot of the information that you provide. It was just so densely packed with just so much background information on who these people are, meaning the Heritage Foundation, Federalist Society, just this new right movement that we're dealing with in this country. Yeah. And so that's really where I want to land with you today.
Yeah. Well,
I'd like for you to really kind of give us a primer in that.
I can jump in on it, and I'd rather be hitting my hand with a hammer than talking about this, because it's very unpleasant to run into yourself. I was in my teens and early 20s when I was my dad's evangelistic, nepotistic sidekick. My qualification for fame and fortune as a young man was that I was his son. And as anybody who understands big-time religion in America or big-time politics or big-time Hollywood knows, nepotism is a thing. And in my case, I was a young filmmaker, and I produced and directed that film series, How Should We Then Live? And then a second one with Dr. C. Everett Koop, who was then Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General. And I guess historians now look back at those film series that I made with my dad and then with Dad and Dr. Koop on abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, what was called the human life ethic. And they look at that as a pivotal moment when abortion and feminism became something that evangelicals got deeply involved with in terms of opposing feminism as opposing abortion. And really that was the beginning of the evangelical rightward tilt. Before that, there were evangelical white Christians who would maybe vote for Democrats sometimes or Republicans. The one or the other party had not captured that vote. And when we first, and this, by the way, leads right into Project 2025, so forgive me for a little bit of a history lesson. When we first made that series, our big fight on abortion was not with the National Organization of Women or Planned Parenthood. Our big fight was with other evangelical leaders who regarded themselves as pro-choice. For instance, the evangelist, the Reverend Billy Graham, who at that time was the most famous evangelist in the world, had been most famous for centuries, actually. And with his huge rallies, friend was the Queen of England, the whole bit. Another was Dr. Criswell, who was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention at that time and pastor of First Baptist in Dallas. It doesn't get more evangelical right-wing white Christianity than that. And he said he thought women ought to be allowed to choose whether they wanted to keep a baby. He even had a biblical argument for the fact that life did not begin until a child took his or her first breath upon birth. And I'm not commenting on that. I'm just saying that surprises people in American politics and journalism. It's like, wait a minute. Weren't evangelicals always right-wing pro-lifers? No, they weren't. Why do I know that? Because I sat down with Dr. Billy Graham in his hospital room at Methodist Hospital at the Mayo Clinic. My dad was in St. Mary's getting chemotherapy. And we were begging Billy, who I'd known since I was a child. I'm still friends with his daughter, Gigi. His grandson and I talk regularly on Zoom together because we understand where we came from. That sort of evangelical royalty, as the New York Times once called, my family. And the point being that Billy Graham, the editors of Christianity Today magazine, a lot of the evangelical establishment, Dr. Criswell and others, never regarded fighting feminism and abortion rights, or let alone contraceptives, which they regarded at the way all Protestant Christians did at the time, evangelical or more liberal, as perfectly fine, family planning as it was called in those days. Why am I making this point? Because you bring up Project 2025, And I just want to say two things about it. First of all, and I know this sounds presumptuous and dumb, but if you understand I also have a sense of humor, you won't take me too seriously. But on this issue, not many issues, but on this issue, I actually happen to know what I'm talking about. Because at age 72, I was there 50 years ago, working with my dad when all this shit got going. I knew the people who were foundational to it. And I understand the battle we had to convince normal white evangelical Christians who wanted to believe in Jesus, love their neighbor, go to church. Yes, a lot of them were racist. A lot of them had presumptions about America and city set on a hill, all those things. Nevertheless, they could not be characterized as members of the hard right. Okay, fast forward 50 years from that period of history. When you get to Project 2025 and people like Leonard Leo and these others who have been involved in nominating Supreme Court justices and telling Donald Trump who to put there so they could reverse Roe v. Wade, you have to understand that the movement, first of all, was radicalized by my dad and I and Dr. Koop when it came to abortion. That became the litmus test. But once that door was open to a series of culture war litmus tests, this became the modus operandi of the whole movement. And then a second thing happened back in those days with Ronald Reagan and the Bush family, all of whom I knew, by the way, personally. And I have let notes from them. And my mom used to stay in the Ford White House often with Betty Ford. She and Betty were friends and so forth. We had really close connections with the power brokers. But here's the second big point. We were outsiders. So we thought it was so cool they would meet with Christian leaders like us. Again, presumption. I was 18, 19, 20, 22, and I considered myself a leader, nepotistic sidekick. I claim to fame as I was the keynote speaker at the Southern Baptist Convention one year. 23,000 pastors listened to me hold forth for an hour because my dad was undergoing chemotherapy. So I was in that mix, but we were outsiders. Fast forward 50 years, Heritage Foundation and these groups that are whispering in Donald Trump's ear how he will conduct his next presidency should he be elected. They are the insiders now. They are the people that dictated to Trump what they wanted in return for bringing evangelicals and conservative Roman Catholics to the table as voters. And what they got in return was a majority on the Supreme Court and about 300 other federal appointees to the court system. And they managed to tip the whole thing to where our morality litmus tests on feminism, abortion, gay rights, and other things now have become the official agenda of one party. So when Vance and Trump are always down on women, when they get someone like Elon Musk to help them target Taylor Swift and joke, I will give you a child, when they talk about childless cat ladies, people look at these as if they are isolated incidents, but actually these are simply the canaries in the coal mine to exactly how they're going to operate when armed with position papers, 90 some pages of position papers from Project 2025 that have now taken our wildest dreams 50 years ago when we started the pro-life movement. And they have accelerated them into the present tense, not as a kind of a wish list, but hey, no wish list. This is what we will do. So what do those things now include? Well, it's not just abortion anymore. They have put down in Project 2025 and they labeled it a hard battle. They actually called it the hardest battle that will be fought, but they've labeled to do this. And that is rescind the rights to contraceptives. No more abortion, gay rights rolled back. When it comes to race relations, all the legislation since Lyndon Johnson forward on desegregation, they intend to attack and roll back. The teaching of American history, all these other things will be in the mold of DeSantis's Florida. It's a wish list that no longer is a wish list. It is an actual plan that will be put into effect by the Trump administration. That, and I'll just finish this rant here, will do so because they're going to replace 50,000 or more federal workers. In other words, not just 10 guys at the top, everybody, including people at the IRS, Social Security, environmental protection agencies, etc., with their own sycophantic people whose only qualification will be They sign on the dotted line in supporting Trump and the fact that his election was stolen and this whole other conspiracy series of theories that make you one of his people. And once those people are in power, two things will happen. First of all, the competency level of the federal government will be zero. So my wife, Jeannie, and I were in our 70s. Now we get Social Security and Medicare. Kiss that off, because it's going to be run by idiots. It's going to be run by people whose only qualification is like my nepotism when I was in my teens and 20s. Same deal. They're close to the top guy. They have kissed his butt sufficiently to get the job, or kissed the butt of somebody like Leonard Leo or one of these other people at Heritage or somewhere like that. So then if you just want to look at the Heritage Foundation and why they are so radical, this is where they are different than my dad and I in the 70s and 80s. We were just evangelical Protestants convinced that abortion is murder, and we turned it into a litmus test. Then all those other things got added. We weren't into those things. We weren't particularly against gay rights. That wasn't even on the radar screen. But Leonard Leo and Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation today, are being run by people who are part of a Roman Catholic organization called Opus Dei. Now, here's the weird thing. The disease of the right now is conspiracism. You know, Pizzagate, there's kids being molested. Democrats are communists. Kamala Harris, who knows what she is, you know, in league with the devil. The whole thing's cast in spiritual terms by these crazy Pentecostals, which is the background you came from, and charismatic Christians who are saying, you know, we're fighting this forces of darkness, of which, say, Frank Schaeffer and Dara Starr Tucker would be one of the forces of darkness, because here we're taking the other side. We would be demonic in their view for having these views. Those people are now working with a branch, and I have to be very careful here because I happen to like the Roman Catholic Church because I like Italy and I like art. Just to be really blunt about it. There were years when I thought I'd become a Roman Catholic, and really I just wanted to be an Italian. Okay, so you know that's how it actually went because I like art. But these guys at Project 2025 and Heritage now, it's being run by a bunch of conservative Roman Catholics who are working with other conservative Roman Catholics who belong to Opus Dei and other like organizations. So let's just take Opus Dei for a minute. Does this represent mainstream Catholicism? No. They are the enemy of the Pope right now. They want to get rid of him and replace him with one of their people. They don't represent the Catholic Church. What they represent is a secretive organization that came out of the history of Catholicism going back to the Inquisition, but more recent history. Where does Opus Dei come from? It was the secretive Roman Catholic organization used by the dictator of Spain during the fascist era, Francisco Franco, that he formed in league with fascist, literally, I'm not overusing the word, this is not hyperbole, literal fascist priests and bishops in Spain who were part of his regime in hunting down and killing political enemies. That's who Opus Dei is. And they are now ensconced through Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the people they work with, not to mention the Federalist Society that's run by exactly the same kinds of people who belong to the same sorts of organizations, and put freaks of nature like Amy Coney Barrett on the court, who comes out of a weird religious background, literally groomed to be in the position she's in now, like a Manchurian candidate. This is not hyperbole. So here's the ultimate irony, and then I'll quit on this. When you get to Project 2025, it is an actual real conspiracy. In other words, all the conspiracism of these people are complete stupid lies. All right. I'm not in league with the devil. You're not either. This is not spiritual warfare. I'm not a communist. You know, the majority Democrat senators and congressmen are not abusing children in pizza shop basements. None of this is happening. The election was not stolen. There's no plot against Christian America. Gays are not grooming your children. These are all bullshit lies. But there is one actual conspiracy going on, and that is that Project 2025, Leonard Leo, all these people at Heritage, and the Federalist Society actually are trying to put forward an agenda which is not anti-democratic in the sense that Joe Biden was talking about when he spoke of Trump refusing the election result. It's anti-democratic in the sense that it is rooted back into Francisco Franco's vision of Catholicism as the bulwark of fascism. And if you study a little Italian history of the city-states, like Ancona or Trieste or Florence, they were always at war with the papal states and the papal armies, which, by the way, employed slaves at certain points to row their papal galleons and all the rest. And there was this seesaw between what you might call the Francis of Assisi branch of the church, which was all about vows of poverty and actually caring for people, and this power structure of the papacy, often corrupt. I mean, one of the funniest things is to read the history of the papacy and then read these lists of their children who inherited the papal properties. Like, wait a minute, I thought they were all celibate. That kind of thing. No, they were just royal families across these city-states in Italy, Spain, France, and so forth, coalescing into nation states late in Italy, always at war with the papal states. Well, that fascistic authoritarian branch of the Roman Catholic Church, which most Roman Catholics, practicing church-going Roman Catholics who will be in Mass next Sunday morning, are horrified by, in the same way that I, as an American that loves my country and sent a son of mine who volunteered for the Marine Corps, he went off and fought in Afghanistan, 2 tours of duty, and came back in one piece, thank God, and once to Iraq early in that war. Wars I was against, but I was a loyal, patriotic, and am a loyal, patriotic American who understands that you can't demand perfection when it comes to racism, foreign policy, anything else. You can still love your country. Well, that's how most Roman Catholics are. But the knowledgeable ones throw up when you talk about people like Opus Dei. This is like me as a white, patriotic American having to admit that part of my inheritance is the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not happy about it, but I don't lie about it either. So these people like Heritage and these folks on the radical, rabid Roman Catholic far right have now done to the evangelical movement what the evangelical movement did to the Republican Party. They have co-opted it. So they have finished the work we started by pushing it to a new extreme. And how do I know that the evangelical leaders from my day, like Billy Graham, would be physically ill if they knew this had happened? Because I battled them over abortion and they were open and tolerant and kind. One last tiny irony. One of the players in this betrayal of both Christianity and the evangelical movement, who has handed the Heritage Foundation and these other radical, rabid people my inheritance as an evangelical Christian that came from that background, is ironically, irony of irony, Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, who was pro-choice and would not be part of our movement. And Franklin is one of the people who has built a bridge to this extreme right wing that Heritage Foundation represents. And they are banking on Donald Trump and his loathing of democracy for personal reasons, because he doesn't want to go to prison, to use him to advance something that literally comes out of the fascist movement of the 1920s and 30s in Spain, Italy, and Germany. This is not hyperbole. This is what Opus Dei is. It is the extreme right of the Roman Catholic Church that every good Pope-obeying Catholic runs from. And so basically it's to the Roman Catholic Church what the KKK is to being a white Christian male. That's the story.
Again, like I said, when you speak about these things, it's so dense and there's so much information there. It's almost difficult to know kind of where to mine, this conversation for further information. I really want to keep this anchored in a territory that at least most of us do understand, which is how this all affects us, how this all affects the current election in which we're involved. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know just how Catholic the Heritage Foundation is, to know just how Catholic the Federalist Society is. I don't think many people know very much about the Federalist Society. We now know that 6 out of 9 judges on the Supreme Court are Catholic. I think for as much as Jewish people tend to be vilified in our society, and oh, they're running this and running that and running this. I think there's certain sects, and I think it's important, as you did, to make the distinction between the Catholic Church in general versus a lot of these kind of, farther right-wing sects that are infiltrating the culture in ways that even a lot of Catholic folks would be just appalled by.
Yeah, footnote to what you're saying, and I'm not going to go into a rant here, but you got to understand something. Their radical right-wing politics is so attractive that people like Tucker Carlson have become part of their movement. There's a whole group of high-powered, far-right, fascistic white males who have converted to Catholicism, not traditional Catholicism, but to this brand. And there's a whole bunch of very powerful white males who have done this. I think the next one will be Elon Musk. I'll be very surprised if in the next year, because of Tucker and his other friends, if he doesn't convert. They love this. So they're right out of the 14th century papal states, making war on the free republics of Italy to take it all into papal control. That's this branch of Catholicism. You got to understand that. And these white sons of bitches who are always talking about women in a disparaging way, want to take away rights, and don't believe in equal opportunity and all this other stuff, they're all in that same branch. And that doesn't mean they're all part of some plot, but like-minded fellow travelers, they always favor the billionaires. It's always the hierarchy. These are the people who would want to restore a fascistic papal state in the same way that would be right out of the 12th to 14th centuries in Europe, which, by the way, the Medicis and all the more enlightened Catholics fought like hell when they protected people like Galileo Galilei from this exact type of mentality. But this particular movement comes out of the 1930s. I just want to say it again. Literally, this branch of Opus Dei, these people, what they want, who they admire, and who they cite in their own speeches is like, hey, this guy did it right, is Francisco Franco of Spain. Google it. And if you want America to be like that, with our Franco being called Donald Trump, selling his fucking coins and all this other shit, these guys are facilitating it, and they're serious. He's not a serious person. He's just a fraud. These are serious people. And it is no coincidence that guys like Tucker Carlson have thrown in their lot with them.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to remind everyone, if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast version of this show, please do. The link is below. And don't forget to rate and review. It makes a huge difference in how the algorithm ranks shows. Thanks for the support.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people may not know that J.D. Vance himself is a recent convert to Catholicism. Peter Thiel, who absolutely bankrolled J.D. Vance's run for the Senate. J.D. Vance had only been in the Senate for under 2 years by the time he was chosen as Trump's running mate. So he had really absolutely no qualifications to be that. But Peter Thiel himself is also Catholic. Kevin Roberts, who is the head of the Heritage Foundation, is Catholic. And I'm not sure, again, about the actual sects or groups, but when you start to make these connections, we have to be careful, I guess, not to speak too generally about it, but it does start to, when you start to connect the dots, it does speak to a bit of that conspiracy that it really is right out there in the open. You can literally find this
Thiel and all these other guys, and just say it again. We're not talking about the Roman Catholic Church. We're talking about a fringe wing that most Roman Catholics, if they know about it at all, despise. And ironically, that if you look at the history, for instance, of the Italian peninsula, that Christians in Italy, what is now Italy, the modern state of Italy, in their little city-states, like Perugia, where they had to blow up the bishop's papal palace because it was so oppressive to their town. They had all the mini civil wars that got fought in Italy, so that the little republics, whether it was Florence or Lucca or any of these other places, who were they fighting with? They were not fighting with all the popes. They were fighting with this brand of Catholicism. And so actually the Roman Catholic Church themselves, the people of the church, whether it's in Central America or South America or Italy during the time, have always had this odd relationship with the authority figures. And I just want to say that J.D. Vance, Thiel, Tucker Carlson, these other guys didn't convert to the Roman Catholic Church. They converted to a power structure that attracts them because of the politics. They don't know shit about Catholicism. Okay. I know my way around Assisi. I know who Francis was. I can tell you the story of his life. I know more about Catholicism in my little finger, just having lived in Europe and in Italy and having a wife who grew up in a Roman Catholic family, than these people will ever know. All they know is the power structures that attract them to this modern day version of the worst that Roman Catholicism offers. Am I criticizing the Catholics and holding them out as a perspective? No, not at all. Because if you listen to my stuff, I'll tell you the exact same stories about the Protestant movement. And I'll tell you the same sort of stories about certain elements in the Jewish faith that have always been towards an authoritarian view that you see now, for instance, in the presidency and the prime minister of Israel today. We're not picking on anybody. I'm just saying every movement, every race, every ethnic group, every tribe, all of us, because we're human, we have a middle ground. We have reasonable people. That's most people. That's most Catholics. And then there's always this fringe element. And it wouldn't matter whether it was Black Lives Matter and somebody stealing money and whatever, or whether it's white nationalists or whether it's Jews or Catholics. We're all in the same boat. It just happens right now that these sons of bitches are funding and or setting up Donald Trump to get his shit together in a second term in a way that will make your hair curl. And their agenda is not a 20th century agenda. It's a 21st century agenda. It's a 20th century agenda. And I'm going to say it one more time, rooted in to Francisco Franco's vision of what he did to Spain in a 60-year rule as dictator, a bloody dictator, an oppressive dictator, the kind of strong man Donald Trump wants to imitate. And I know it sounds far-fetched, but that's who these guys love.
Well, I think you're one of the few people right now who is really making a distinction between Donald Trump and the forces that have really helped to usher Donald Trump into power. I think Donald Trump has become, an absolutely a lightning rod, understandably, for a lot of people. And our focus is on him because he's such a, frankly, he's a menace. Really, and he's a chaos agent and all of these things. And it's very easy to become overly focused on Trump as a figure, but he really is. I think you are one of the few people who is consistently pointing out that he really is a figurehead. Yeah. He is being used by these forces who have an even greater agenda, because Donald Trump, I don't know that there's really a lot of organization around what he is doing. It's a thirst for power. It's a desire to avoid any kind of legal responsibility for, all of the things we know he has going on, that desire to get back into the office of the presidency. But the forces behind him will outlast and will outlive Donald Trump. So
the people that are going to run the next Trump presidency put the majority on the Supreme Court that just said, as long as he calls it an official action, he can do anything he wants. That's Franco of Spain. That's Mussolini of Italy. That's Hitler of Germany. That's not an American president. And the majority, guided by Roberts, who wanted a majority opinion and did not get one because the liberals dissented. Nevertheless, the way that opinion is written basically hands this country to Trump, or rather to Trump's, quote, advisors, who are working hard to keep him out of prison. And basically the trade is, we'll elect you again, keep you out of prison. You can use your authority in ways that are totally undemocratic and basically take the agenda of Opus Dei and ram it down the throats of the American people. And how do you describe that when most of us would not buy into any of these things? Ask your average American on the street if they think they should have the right to contraceptives. Left, right, in between, Catholic. Well, guess what? When those things are taken away from us, they will be taken away by a minority regime ruling the majority that doesn't agree with their views and doesn't want to live in the country they designed for them. And, there's a name for that. And having lived in South Africa for a year in the mid-1980s, I can tell you what it is. It's called apartheid. And this will not be racial apartheid, although it will be partly that too. These will be white men in power. It's more than that. It's an ideological religious apartheid. And guess what the model for that is? And I know this sounds obscure to people who are listening who are not history buffs about Italy like I am. This is exactly what the more authoritarian popes tried to do to all the little independent city-states all through Italian history until Italy became a unified country under Garibaldi in the 1800s. They were at war with them because they hated the fact that these people wanted self-determination. And so there's these famous scenes where the Pope attacks a town again and again and again, or comes in and promises to protect them against, say, the Turks, who on the naval side of things, who were through the Ottoman Empire coming in at those times, and then turns the guns on the people, murders their princes. Why? Because there's that strain of authoritarianism that people like Tucker Carlson, Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance love, because they want to be that guy. And these people hand them permission and dress it up as a religious kind of spirituality. It doesn't seem possible we're talking about this in 2024, but I am not making this shit up. And the pattern through the history of the papal authority versus the people, the actual Catholic people, and their priests and their bishops who tried to defend them against these authoritarian assholes who again and again and again wanted to pull a Trump, wasn't possible in the last go round because Trump never knew what he was doing, and he had a few whispers in his ears telling him about Supreme Court stuff. This time it will happen. And the first thing that's going to happen is that when he turns his guns literally against the people who opposed him, like you and me, not to mention former presidents and others, as long as he couches this as an official act, he's already been rubber stamped by whom? The Supreme Court justices in the majority who were put in power by people like the Heritage Foundation and others who worked behind the scenes to get them nominated and gave him the list of people. Everything is in place now for him to do his worst. And you just have to remember one last thing that's different. This time around, Trump's motivation is not to be president. Trump's motivation is to stay out of prison. And so basically he can never then relinquish power, because the minute he becomes a citizen again and doesn't have that special coverage from the court and these other people. So we're basically thinking about re-electing him as a kind of president for life, either in fact or by proxy with a J.D. Vance or some other sycophant who will keep going along with him. We're really up against it. And it's not quite what we think when we say that he's against democracy. It's more than that. It's an alternative system of government that never has been comfortable with democracy. Right-wing Catholicism has never been comfortable with democracy. That's not the way their system operates. They are a hierarchy by the divine right of God, appointing a pope. And that hierarchy crushed the city-states of Italy for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And people don't get it. We've seen the model again and again and again and again and again. And it's what the French Revolution was about. And it's what the Russian Revolution was about in a weird way, because it was that same model of autocracy crushing the people. So, hey man, if we're going to learn anything from history, you don't want people like Project 2025 whispering in the ear of a fool who's trying to stay out of prison and taking us there. So I think this is certainly the most serious thing that's happened in my 72-year existence in terms of, what can happen to us politically. There's been nothing like that in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who are just, I think there's been a lot of talk around messaging and what is the best way to reach undecided voters, and this whole idea of democracy being under threat and there being this fascist regime that's attempting to take over and all this stuff. I think a lot of this stuff just feels very heavy for people, and it feels hyperbolic for a lot of people because it just feels there's just something almost unreal about it to a lot of folks. And it immediately sounds like an overreaction.
Trump comes across as a joke.
Yeah.
So how do you take this guy serious? What do you mean he's going to destroy democracy? Right. He can't even stay on the subject when he's giving a talk to his own people. He wanders off and talks about crowd size and Kamala Harris, and J.D. Vance says, whatever he says about, Thiel and Musk and these other guys are sort of obsessed with women or getting them pregnant or whatever. It's a joke. But I promise you this, the guys who wrote Project 2025 are not a joke. All right. And they have a long history they're drawing on. They didn't cook up this shit last Thursday. This is a tradition of papal authority that goes back into the confrontation of the papal states with the rest of Europe since the beginning of the church. This is the whole deal. And they've tapped into the worst element of it. And I repeat, it would be as if the people whispering in his ear were basically trying to come up with a plan for America that had been designed by the Ku Klux Klan. That's how far off the map this is. And it has nothing to do with most Catholic people. It has nothing to do with the elements of the Catholic Church we all love. It is the antithesis of everything else, in the same way that, we're limping forward out of the era where we had slaves and all the rest of it. Rational people admit that that's our past, but we don't want to go back. All right. So rational Catholics, this is not the church they want to belong to, including the current Pope, which is why people like the guys writing Project 2025 hate the current Pope, because he does love democracy. He does love freedom. He does fight for the underdog. You might agree with disagree with the doctrine, but the current Pope is one of the good guys. And there have been many popes like that. But what they're tapping into are not the good guys. They're tapping into the dark side of Roman Catholicism, which is close to 2,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And has been the fight that basically any Italian historian will tell you, yes, this was the big fight in Italy, that the small republics like Ancona and Trieste and Florence and Siena and Lucca, they all tell the same story. Who was their enemy? Rome, not the Romans, the papacy. Because when those bad popes, because they weren't all bad, would come into power, they would draw on this authoritarian model that has now been revived 2024 right here in America by the people running the Heritage Foundation. They're not all in that, but that's their core.
Well, it's very interesting to me that when all of the stuff about Project 2025 started to come to the fore, I did one of my breakdowns on it back in February when not a lot of people were talking about it. Taraji P. Henson ended up, screaming at the top of her lungs about it on an award show, back a few months ago. And that's when a lot of people started to become aware of it. And that is when Trump himself began to attempt to really actively distance himself from it. And anytime it's brought up now, it's the same line about, I don't know who these people are. And obviously we know more than 140 people who were connected to his administration, were involved in writing the thing. I mean, no one really believes, other than his acolytes, no one really believes that he doesn't know anything about it, doesn't know who's behind it, doesn't have anything to do with it. But I did a video recently where I basically said, let's stop trying to name the thing and trying to tie it to him in name, because he's done a fairly decent job of not creating any official connection to it. But let's start evaluating what he has to say, his policies. Let's start asking whether or not the policies that he is advocating are connected to Project 2025. Sure. Do they support the ideas and the policies that are being put forth in Project 2025? So I guess my question for you, just from your point of view, is why did Trump not simply embrace this? Because pretty much everything that's come out of his mouth has been supportive of this manifesto. J.D. Vance wrote the foreword to Kevin Roberts' book that now has been delayed. He's the head of the Heritage Foundation. His book now that was had been titled something about burning down Washington to save America. It has been delayed until after the election because it is so incendiary. And
Leonard Leo, for instance, who runs the Federalist.
I'm sorry?
Leonard Leo, who's the big guy at the Federalist, basically, he's the one who's come up with a list of new judges to be, and he's the father of the modern Supreme Court. He's been working with Heritage, and all through this, it's been a symbiotic relationship. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump want to talk about Haitians eating cats and dogs. And all that is really simple. For anybody who has seen The Wizard of Oz, it's really simple. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That's all it is. Because if you're stirring up a racist hatred of people who aren't thinking in these terms and certainly don't know the history of the Heritage and the Federalists and so forth and so on, You can't get into that. You just say, there's some inconvenient pictures of you on your private plane with all these guys, by the way. They've all known each other for years and worked together. So, you just look in your face and lie about it and then change the subject. And the subject is you just go to the next extreme lie and basically talk about that. And it has two advantages. First of all, it keeps the media and everybody else frothing away about all this absurd nonsense of meaningless discussion. Are Haitians eating cats? And we send reporters out to find out if they are. Blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, election day is coming up. As soon as the election's over, there'll be no more denial like, oh, I never met these guys, even though there's all these pictures of me on the plane with them. Then it's just simply, okay, they've kept me out of jail. I owe them, quid pro quo, and we will move forward with the program. How do we know that? Because last time he was handed a list of judges to appoint, he appointed every single one of them. So the only thing he did in his last term of any note was make being a billionaire, close to tax-free for billionaires and corporations. And then secondly, appoint everybody he was told to appoint by these activists. Okay, the next round is, okay, now how do we use the system? Because the biggest thing that's happened is not the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Hate to say that because it's a big issue. There's a much bigger one. And that is the majority on the Supreme Court have rubber stamped everything he can do in the future if he says it's an official action. And that will make the Roe v. Wade thing look like nothing. Because when he has the permission to do that, to hunt down his enemies like Franco did, out of which these guys, idea of how to run a country comes. And when he takes revenge on anybody who ever opposed him, whether it's a late night talk show host or somebody like you or me or whomever, when Thiel and Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk get the country they want, which is a white supremacist apartheid nation run by powerful billionaires with access to the direct power, the throne, in the same way that people used to suck up to the papacy and the papal states. And that's the way they would solve their problems in the little city states that were trying to be free republics away from the Roman pontificate. Okay, this is the model they're following. So it's a power structure. It's all white males. That's it. The rest of us can just go to hell. And these guys don't have access to a smart pope. They rather have access to a fool who only cares whether you like him or not and agree on crowd size or how big his hands are or whatever the thing is he's obsessing about. Bypass him completely. We've kept you out of jail. Here's what we want you to do. And at that point, you won't hear anything more, as I said a moment ago, about distancing him because he doesn't have any plan. This will be what he does.
Well, this stuff is fascinating, Frank, and I could talk to you about it for hours. I want to leave people with enough information that they are able to digest. Watching your videos on this topic kind of sent me into a rabbit hole, studying more about Opus Dei, studying more about Francisco Franco and the history of the Spanish Civil War and all of that. I mean, it really just opened up kind of a world that I don't know enough about myself. And so I plan to do one of my breakdowns, my little mini documentary pieces on this topic, because I think not enough people really understand the depth of what you're speaking about. But I really appreciate the nuance and the background and the history that you've helped to bring to this conversation, because I think if a lot of folks really understand where a lot of this stuff is coming from, it will make a little bit more sense to them. And, maybe certain keys will start to turn in their brain, just that little necessary tweak sometimes is helpful to understand, who's really operating and who's really turning, knobs behind the scenes. And so I appreciate your knowledge and your willingness and ability to share that on a consistent basis. I really appreciate that.
There's something I just want to add, and that is just remember, we can talk about evangelical white Christians elected Donald Trump, but there were evangelical white leaders like the Reverend Billy Graham that believed in choice and would have been sticking up for women now. And they would be shocked by Elon Musk saying, I will give you a child. And they would hate J.D. Vance. And they would say, these are lies about Haitians. These are our brothers in Christ. That's the true evangelical movement. And I want to add this. This would be the time for Roman Catholics to say, Heritage Foundation doesn't represent me. I don't want to have legislation that takes away contraceptives. I'm a Roman Catholic. I believe in choice. I think people ought to have freedom. I'm glad I live in a democracy and not in a small Italian city that's been crushed by the Papal States. We've moved past that. Thank God for America. Guess what? That's 99% of the Roman Catholics in this country, including a lot of local priests, some bishops, although the bishops are pretty far right in America now. And I would appeal to Christians, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Pentecostal, anybody who tries to follow Christ or looks at the historical church and say, yeah, we have many flaws where we grasped power, whether it's the slaveholding states or the Bay State colony, burning witches. We've done terrible things, but there's a terribly good side to this. Half our hospitals have the names of saints on them. Why? Because they were founded by Roman Catholics who were reaching out to people in the name of Jesus and caring for them. And that's the Roman Catholic Church that those of us that love Catholicism, as I do. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I love Catholicism and what it produced in the culture and the art. Let's defend Catholicism against these enemies of Roman Catholicism. Because believe me, Project 2025 is a sworn enemy of the Catholic Church we all love. Because should they triumph, the same thing will happen here to the reputation of Roman Catholicism, as did happen in Franco's Spain when he allied himself with right-wing fascist bishops. And Spain now is one of the most unchurched countries in the world. Very secular, because they came to understand this is what Catholicism is, and they completely turned their backs on it because it was presented to them as fascism. And so I would say, wow, I feel that in trying to expose the tyranny of these people and how they will use Trump, I'm actually defending Christianity. I'm defending Catholicism. I'm defending my Roman Catholic family that I married into with my wife. Because to me, Roman Catholicism is an honorable tradition full of light and beauty and the greatest art that's ever been produced in the world, if I may be so bold, and architecture and free republics that stood up for their rights. That's Catholicism. And this stuff I'm talking about, this oppressive horror, is completely outside of that tradition and was fought against by them in the same way that Billy Graham was a conservative, white, evangelical Southern Baptist Christian, but he desegregated his campaigns and evangelistic rallies in 1954, before anybody else was doing this, before it was the cool thing to do, because he believed that's what Jesus would have him do. And I'm just saying, that's the tradition that people who are secular or Christian should be fighting for. That's what gave us hospitals. That's what gave us all these NGOs fighting for people's health all over the world. Most of these have roots in Christian and religious organizations or Jewish or whatever it may be. So I don't want to be misinterpreted here as sort of paranoid about, the Catholics are coming. No. It's the opposite. These people are going to destroy the reputation of the Catholic Church in the same way that the white evangelical Pentecostal leaders who sucked up to Donald Trump and said God had blessed him and chosen to be his servant have destroyed the representation of Christ on earth through the evangelical witness. Because now we all think of Donald Trump and stupid white Christians. We don't think of Jesus. So weird as this may sound, I just want to say very clearly, I am defending Christianity and I am defending Catholicism by calling out these traitors in the same way that in the 1930s, anybody who loved Germany would have said, Hitler doesn't represent me. That's who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. So you love Jesus, you love the Catholic Church, you honor your tradition, you honor the tradition of following Jesus as a Protestant, you better stand up to these sons of bitches because they will take our reputation as Christians down with them. This is not what Christianity is about.
Well, your voice is needed. It's necessary. And I'm hearing you loud and clear. You're helping to bring clarity to me in this moment and to a lot of other people. So like I said, I look forward to doing a packaged presentation on exactly what you're talking about and helping more people to understand this from a historical point of view. So thank you, Frank Schaeffer, for your conversation, for your enlightenment. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. And thank you again, Dara, for your music. And anybody who wants to hear one of the greatest jazz vocalists alive right now in contemporary America, you start downloading and listening to Dara's music. She has a voice that will just absolutely floor you.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that so much. And I look forward to seeing you in Boston in November.
Yeah, absolutely. Just time and place, and we'll be there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Frank.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.